Samuel, a young man known for his calm and easygoing demeanor, was a student at Auchi Polytechnic. He was the type of individual who conscientiously avoided trouble, preferring to mind his own business and stay out of harm's way. However, when he felt his personal space or dignity was being encroached upon, Samuel would not hesitate to defend himself. His calm exterior belied a strong sense of self-respect and a willingness to stand up for himself when necessary. It was on one fateful day, while Samuel was engrossed in a game of snooker, that an unfortunate incident occurred. The game, which had been a source of relaxation and enjoyment for Samuel, was abruptly disrupted by the arrival of some members of the Vikings confraternity. These young men, known for their rough and intimidating demeanor, stormed into the venue, their presence commanding attention. Without hesitation, they approached Samuel, who was still focused on his game, and ordered him to vacate the snooker table. Their reason, they claimed, was that they wanted to play the game themselves. Samuel, feeling a sense of injustice and unwarranted disruption, refused to comply with their demands. He explained, in a calm but firm tone, that he had been playing the game before they arrived and saw no reason why he should relinquish his spot. The refusal to back down, however, only seemed to infuriate the Vikings, particularly one of their members, a burly young man known as Cross. Cross, his face twisted in a scowl, took umbrage at Samuel's refusal to comply and decided to take matters into his own hands. Without warning, he lashed out at Samuel, delivering a series of resounding slaps that left the young man reeling. As Samuel, his face stinging from the slaps, attempted to retaliate, he was restrained by his nephew, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing concern. The nephew, aware of the Vikings' notorious reputation as courteous, quickly intervened, grasping Samuel's arm and urging him not to escalate the situation. "Leave it alone, Samuel," the nephew cautioned, his voice low and urgent. "Those guys are trouble. They are courteous. You don't want to mess with them." Samuel, still seething with anger and humiliation, reluctantly allowed himself to be led away from the scene. As they departed, he couldn't help but feel a sense of embarrassment and wounded pride. The encounter had left him battered and bruised, both physically and emotionally. His ego, once buoyant and confident, now felt deflated and bruised. The memory of the encounter lingered, refusing to be shaken off. Samuel couldn't help but wonder if he had been wise to back down, to allow the Vikings to intimidate and humiliate him. A part of him yearned for revenge, for the opportunity to prove himself and defend his honor. Yet another part of him, the rational and cautious side, urged restraint, cautioning him against the dangers of confronting the Vikings. As the days passed, Samuel found himself grappling with these conflicting emotions, unsure of which path to take. One thing, however, was certain: the encounter with the Vikings had left an indelible mark on his psyche, a reminder of the dangers and uncertainties that lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. Samuel's agitation and resentment simmered just below the surface, waiting to boil over. Every time he stepped foot on campus, he seemed to coincidentally cross paths with Cross, the Viking who had publicly humiliated him with a resounding slap. The constant reminders of his defeat were a festering wound, gnawing at Samuel's pride and sense of self-worth. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel's frustration reached a boiling point. One fateful evening, as he walked alone, lost in thought, he muttered to himself, "If I don't pay Cross back for that humiliating slap, I'll be a fool and a weakling." The words echoed in his mind, fueling his determination to exact revenge. With a newfound sense of purpose, Samuel began to plot his revenge. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to risk the potential consequences. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel waited patiently for the perfect moment to strike. That moment arrived when Samuel spotted Cross at a local chemist shop. Without hesitation, he strode purposefully towards his nemesis, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached Cross, he summoned every ounce of anger and frustration, channeling it into a powerful blow that landed squarely on Cross's forehead. Cross crumpled to the ground, dazed and disoriented. Samuel, fueled by adrenaline and a desire for revenge, continued to rain down blows upon his opponent. The sound of pounding fists and the sight of Cross's bloodied face only seemed to enrage Samuel further. It wasn't until some nearby onlookers intervened, begging Samuel to stop, that he finally relented. Cross lay motionless on the ground, his face a bloody mess. Samuel, his chest heaving with exertion, stood over his vanquished foe, a sense of satisfaction and vindication washing over him. However, Samuel's moment of triumph was short-lived. Realizing the gravity of his actions, he knew he had to flee the campus immediately. The Vikings, notorious for their ruthlessness and vengeance, would stop at nothing to exact revenge. Samuel's instincts proved correct. The Vikings launched a relentless search for him, scouring every inch of the campus and beyond. They made inquiries about his hometown, which was conveniently located within Auchi, and set their sights on tracking him down. One fateful day, the Vikings descended upon Samuel's family home, intent on delivering a message. Unfortunately, Samuel was not present, having wisely laid low. However, his junior brother was not so fortunate. The Vikings subjected him to a brutal beating, leaving him battered and bruised. The Vikings' rampage did not stop there. They also vandalized a small shop Samuel's mother had set up in front of their house, sending a clear message to Samuel: "We will find you, and we will make you pay." The Vikings' actions were a stark reminder of the dangers of seeking revenge. Samuel's decision to exact revenge on Cross had set off a chain reaction, putting his loved ones in harm's way. As he lay low, waiting for the storm to pass, Samuel couldn't help but wonder if his thirst for revenge had been worth the risk. After a semester of self-imposed exile, Samuel finally returned to school, his heart heavy with apprehension. He had been away for so long, and the memories of his brutal encounter with Cross and the Vikings still lingered, casting a dark shadow over his psyche. Determined to avoid any potential confrontations, Samuel kept a low profile, steering clear of public spaces and familiar haunts where he might run into Cross or any other Viking member who could recognize him. As he navigated the campus, Samuel couldn't shake off the feeling of vulnerability. He desperately needed protection, a sense of security that would allow him to focus on his studies without constantly looking over his shoulder. It was then that he turned to a trusted friend, confiding in him about his fears and anxieties. The friend listened intently, nodding sympathetically, before offering a solution that would change Samuel's life forever. The friend explained that joining the Buccaneers, a rival confraternity, would provide Samuel with the protection he so desperately needed. He offered to introduce Samuel to some members of the Buccaneers, and after some deliberation, Samuel agreed to meet with them. The introduction was made, and Samuel found himself sitting in a cramped, dimly lit room, discussing the possibilities of membership with a representative of the Buccaneers. As Samuel listened to the representative's speech, he couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. Joining the Buccaneers was a serious commitment, one that would require him to pledge allegiance to a new family, with its own set of rules and expectations. And yet, the promise of protection was tantalizing, a prospect that seemed too good to pass up. As Samuel left the meeting, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of him was tempted to join the Buccaneers, to seek refuge under their umbrella of protection. Another part of him, however, was hesitant, unsure if he was ready to commit to a lifestyle that seemed so fraught with danger and uncertainty. As he walked home, lost in thought, Samuel stumbled upon an old friend, Anthony, at a photographer's stand. The two friends exchanged warm greetings, and Samuel found himself opening up to Anthony about his plight. Anthony listened attentively, his expression sympathetic, before offering words of encouragement. Anthony assured Samuel that he knew someone on campus who could help him, someone with the power and influence to protect him from the Vikings. He offered to introduce Samuel to this individual, and Samuel, desperate for a solution, agreed to follow him. As they walked, Anthony remained tight-lipped about the person's identity, fueling Samuel's curiosity. Finally, they arrived at a modest house on the outskirts of campus, and Anthony knocked on the door. The door creaked open, revealing a tall, imposing figure with a stern expression. The figure's gaze seemed to bore into Samuel's soul, as if sizing him up. After a moment of silence, he spoke, his voice low and commanding. He explained that he could help Samuel, but it would require a significant commitment from him. Samuel would need to join the Black Axe, a powerful and feared confraternity, one that would provide him with the protection he needed, but also demand loyalty and dedication in return. Samuel hesitated, unsure if he was ready to take the plunge. But the promise of protection, of freedom from intimidation and oppression, was too enticing to resist. He agreed to join the Black Axe, and the figure smiled, a cold, calculating glint in his eye. As Samuel underwent the initiation ritual, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He was committing himself to a lifestyle that was fraught with danger, a lifestyle that could potentially consume him. And yet, as he emerged from the ritual, a sense of pride and belonging washed over him. He was now a member of the Black Axe, a brotherhood that would protect him with their lives. As Samuel walked away from the initiation ritual, he felt a sense of freedom that he had not felt in months. He was no longer vulnerable, no longer at the mercy of the Vikings. He was now a member of the Black Axe, a group that would stand by him, no matter what dangers lay ahead. But as he looked over his shoulder, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he had just made a deal with a powerful and ruthless organization, one that would demand absolute loyalty and dedication from him. He wondered if he had made a mistake, if he had traded one form of oppression for another. Only time would tell. After Samuel joined the Black Axe confraternity, he underwent a transformation, shedding his timid persona and embracing a newfound fearlessness. He carried himself with confidence, both within and outside the campus, as if nothing could ever intimidate him again. However, beneath the surface, Samuel harbored concerns about his new path. He had never been one to indulge in vices like smoking or drinking, but in the company of his fellow axemen, he found himself succumbing to these habits. As Samuel became more entrenched in the Black Axe, he began to participate in meetings and gatherings, where he would often receive updates on the confraternity's activities. One such meeting took place on a day that would forever be etched in Samuel's memory. The axemen were informed about an ongoing conflict at Udi High Temple, a nearby school, where the Vikings had taken the lead, having already eliminated 2 axemen. The news sparked a sense of urgency among the Black Axe members, and Samuel, along with a few other axemen, was chosen to embark on a mission to the school as external operatives. Their objective was clear: to carry out targeted hits on the Vikings and restore balance to the conflict. As they arrived at Udi High Temple, they met with the axe head of the institution, who briefed them on the situation and provided valuable intelligence on the Vikings' movements. Samuel and his fellow external axemen were tasked with infiltrating the school, gathering information, and eliminating their targets. The days that followed were a blur of stealth, strategy, and violence. Samuel and his team navigated the treacherous landscape of the school, avoiding detection and striking at their enemies with precision. Within a week, they had managed to take out 2 Viking members, but the conflict was far from over. The Vikings had also claimed the lives of 3 axemen, and the final score stood at 3-2 in favor of the Vikings. As the violence escalated, a peace talk was initiated, and eventually, a fragile peace was restored to the institution. For Samuel, the experience had been a baptism by fire, his first taste of war and the harsh realities of confraternity life. He had witnessed the brutal side of human nature and had played a part in it. As Samuel and his fellow external axemen returned to their own school, he couldn't help but think about the events that had led him to this point. He remembered the humiliation he had suffered at the hands of Cross and the Vikings, and a burning desire for revenge ignited within him. He approached his fellow Black Axe members, seeking their support in exacting revenge on Cross and the Vikings. However, to his surprise, their leader refused his wish, citing that the incident had occurred in the past and that they couldn't justify going to war with the Vikings over a personal vendetta. Samuel was taken aback, unsure of how to process this decision. He had expected his fellow axemen to rally behind him, to support his quest for revenge. Instead, he was met with a stern refusal, a reminder that the Black Axe was not a tool for personal vengeance, but a collective entity with its own interests and agendas. As Samuel grappled with this newfound understanding, he couldn't help but wonder if he had misjudged the Black Axe and its true nature. Had he joined a brotherhood that valued loyalty and protection, or had he simply traded one form of oppression for another? The question swirled in his mind, leaving him with a sense of unease and uncertainty about his future within the Black Axe. Samuel's desire for revenge against Cross had become an all-consuming force, driving him to take matters into his own hands. Despite his fellow axemen's refusal to support his vendetta, Samuel was resolute in his pursuit of vengeance. He spent countless hours tracking Cross, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment arrived when Samuel finally located Cross in a secluded area, far from prying eyes. With a sense of calm determination, Samuel took aim and fired, shooting Cross at close range. As Cross slumped to the ground, Samuel assumed he had finally achieved his goal, that Cross was dead and his revenge had been exacted. Without hesitation, Samuel fled the scene, making his way back to his hometown, where he hoped to lay low and avoid any repercussions. However, unbeknownst to Samuel, Cross had miraculously survived the shooting, and the Vikings were already on the hunt for Samuel's blood. Meanwhile, Samuel's actions had not gone unnoticed by his Black Axe leader, who was furious that Samuel had carried out a hit without his approval. The leader saw Samuel's actions as a betrayal, a reckless disregard for the confraternity's rules and protocols. As Samuel settled into his hometown, thinking he had escaped the consequences of his actions, the Vikings were closing in on him. They had tracked him down, and on a fateful day, they finally found him. In a hail of bullets, Samuel was shot dead, his life cut short in a tragic act of revenge. As the news of Samuel's demise spread, it became clear that his quest for revenge had ultimately led to his own downfall. In his blind pursuit of vengeance, Samuel had lost sight of the dangers and consequences of his actions. His story served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the devastating cost of unchecked ambition and the destructive power of revenge.